let's get back home to Nigeria, where the country's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, says the Buhari's administration has agreed to the recommendation of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council that manufacturing will be Nigeria's main focus in bringing about dynamic growth, jobs, and exports. The Vice President was speaking yesterday at his tour of the Secure ID, and that was a smart card manufacturing facility based here in Lagos. Joining me now to discuss Nigeria's path to industrial manufacturing is Kyari Bukar, a former chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Bukar also currently serves as the chairman of Sunu Assurances, PLC. Good evening, sir. Thanks for coming on the program.
Good evening, Bosun.
Thank you. Do you agree that manufacturing should be Nigeria's main focus in order to achieve what Mr. Vice President described as dynamic growth, jobs, and exports?
Indeed. I think what the Vice President has quite clearly stated is what we all have been saying over and over. It's not just agric, but the entire value chain of agric, which naturally means you have to put in the processing, the storage capability, the finishing of it, such as rice mills and flour making out of the grains and paste making for some of the vegetables and canning and so on and so forth. All of those come in either the light or heavy manufacturing category. And essentially what we have in Nigeria today is that we tend to export crude products, crude oil, and then crude agricultural products and crude minerals, et cetera, So the best thing to do is to start with the lower end of the manufacturing value chain and then continually add on and invest. And the investment can come in two ways. One is that I am somebody who strongly advocates for private sector investment rather than have government building those manufacturing plants. I would prefer the government creating that enabling environment. How do you do that? One, provide the basic necessities or catalytic requirements for a manufacturing industry, which is power, roads, and all the capabilities of adding values. Then the second is to actually have a business-friendly government policies, whether be it at the federal level or at the states level. Now, that basically means that people that want to invest in those segments of the economy would tend to say, well, I would rather go into Nigeria and invest rather than the neighboring countries and so on and so forth. Now, have in mind that AFCFTA is leveling the field in Africa. Essentially, that means that people or money or investments will flow into countries that are investor-friendly, and then they could actually move their finished goods. Now, to have competitive advantage, one, we have a very large market. Two, we also can build the capabilities and also the capital attraction of capital investment needs to go into the light manufacturing and also subsequently to heavy manufacturing. So essentially, I do endorse the statement of the Vice President and also what some of the industry players have been saying all along.
So, but what industries under manufacturing should Nigeria prioritize, and why? Should we be building SUVs, or we should be building laptops, or what should we prioritize when we want to catalyze our industrialization? Have we decided what exactly we want to do? What sector?
Yeah, I would like to see quite a purposeful or deliberate policy in those regards, meaning that here are a few areas that we should prioritize and put our effort and energy into. We shouldn't exclude anything that comes by way of investments. That is that assuming that we can create what I would call industrial clusters. For example, if you are adding value chain, if you're developing the agri value chain, I would like to see the industrial clusters coming up in some of the highly producing manufacturing bases, such as Nasarawa or Gombe. Nasarawa for sesame processing, Gombe for cotton, and so on and so forth. And then the textile value chain can then be added. Because the availability of raw materials is very important for any manufacturing endeavor. The second thing is that there must also be the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure. And here I mean power, water in some industries, and also availability of taking the finished goods out. So either rail or roads. I think the federal government is doing quite well in terms of finishing up some of the rail network that was started, but I think that we still have a long way to go. Of course, naturally, my preference would have been to have standard gauge all over the country. Unfortunately, we haven't done that. I think we're trying to be penny wise, pound foolish by renovating what we already have, rather than just rip it apart and build what I would call a standard gauge, and thereby the efficiency of movement of goods and services would intensify, and that would make Nigeria more competitive. Because remember, when you go into the manufacturing field, you're not only competing with other local manufacturers, but you're also competing in the global space. I would like to see highly standardized, high-quality products coming out of Nigeria and competing with some of the global players.
Well, so I'm going to, well said, but again, I'm going to go back to that question a bit. We talk about agro-allied industries. That is tied to agriculture, of which we're so resource-based. Are there other sectors that you think we should focus on if we say we have a deliberate policy for competitiveness, a competitive advantage that can take us very quickly to the next level, or at least get us off the ground?
What I have seen is that we can start naturally with some of the things where we have our products, the raw materials which we have been feeding the world at subpar price, and then we end up importing less than 1/100th of what we have exported in finished goods at about the same price, if not higher. So what we need to do is look at how we can capture the value, and in so doing, produce or create huge numbers of jobs in the various segments. For example, in the cocoa, the timber area, the iron and steel, which I think we are still quite nascent. We haven't yet hit that yet. And it's all about the energy, consistency of energy production. But on the technology space, I think we are seeing, of course, the factory that the Vice President visited, Mrs. Akinkugbe Kofo had been in that line of business for over 20 years or thereabouts. I first met her while I was in Value Card, and she had this vision or this dream of producing what she's producing today. And I commend her for her grit and persistence in making it a very successful, technology-based manufacturing entity. I believe that there are a number of such smaller players in the space, but none as well developed as what she has. So we do have areas of opportunities as a country that we can bank on. There are products that we are importing in large quantities. We look at that, we reverse engineer, and then go in for the manufacturing of those products. Worst case, we can do light industries. You know, the joke was when the CBN governor first came in, he was talking about toothpicks. And I hope that today...
Then we'll talk about pencil.
Yes, and then pencils. And I hope today we have both toothpick and pencil manufacturers in the country, and many other things, naturally.
I think when we come back, Kyari Bukar, we'll talk more about who does what and the roles of states and MDAs. But again, talking about retooling our business environment, we'll revisit that for the industrialization drive. Stand by, everyone. So the Nigerian Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, yesterday spoke about the importance of some government agencies in the drive towards the building of a manufacturing-based economy. Let's continue this conversation with Kyari Bukar, former chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Thank you so much for standing by, sir. Let's take this question about the Vice President spoke about retooling our business environment for greater competitiveness, to use his exact words in that press statement. What should these involve and how?
Now it requires all of us, and by that I mean the private sector and also the public sector. Now, when you're talking about the public sector, there are actually two different areas. One is the regulatory agencies, such as SON or NAFDAC, whomever is granting you the license to operate or renewing your license or whatever. The other is actually ministries such as the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investments. Now, the KPIs for those ministries or those agencies of government need to be tilted towards business development. What are you doing to enable or to attract more investors into those spaces that are considered priority? Now, when you do that, then it becomes incumbent upon them to actually be more business friendly rather than be fixated on revenue generation. The minute you are now fixated on revenue generation, it's about what can we get for government coffers. Now, that to me is more of an entity that is more fixed on instant gratification rather than developing the ecosystem such that there would be more players and the income would naturally come anyway. So the fixation on now instant, right now, charging more, making it difficult with bureaucratic bottlenecks, that need to be gotten rid of. And I think
that's my point, respectively, sir.
Right.
When Mr. Vice President talked about the customs, the NAFDAC, the Standard Organization of Nigeria, the CAC, everybody else becoming business facilitators, Mr. Vice President says, rather than policemen, right, or revenue generators. So we're talking about a reorientation here. We're talking about agencies that we've run for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years as revenue generators. They are not business facilitators. They just want to collect. How do we turn these individuals, these government officials and the system and the processes to the one that is more like Romeo and Juliet?
Correct. I think what needs to happen is a change in mindset or a paradigm shift, as some of the analysts would call it. But what I really like to see happen is to have a very transparent measurement, because anything you measure gets done. Anything you look at and evaluate and measure gets done. And therefore, what needs to happen is that their key performance indicators need to shift from how much revenue you've generated to what are the things you've done, how many jobs have you created by virtue of your regulatory function.
So should we communicate, and I'm going to respectfully be cutting in, should we communicate this in a circular to these agencies, or we need to take them to a seminar or a workshop with NESG, wherever it is, Lagos Business School? What needs to be done? Do we need to take the Customs Comptroller General of Customs and the DG of SON and NAFDAC to Lagos Business School to get this done?
It requires that, actually. It does require interaction with entities such as the Lagos Business School, or for that matter, think tanks like NESG and the likes, to have those kinds of discussion. But at the top level, we also need to have the change in that mind shift or mindset, so that there would be a very strong correlation between what the Vice President had said and what they do day to day or on a periodic basis, whether it's quarterly or annually. Now, when you begin to do that, then you would find that they would naturally shift towards the items or the things that are considered more important than what had been the history of those institutions. So I do agree that there is a need for a dialogue or for a conversation, and also clarity of what kinds of templates do they need to share with those agencies, so that they would also begin to cascade that down to the officers on the beat, so to speak. So essentially, it's a mindset shift. Once a country is known to be business friendly, it actually very easily goes around the world, and you would begin to see a proliferation of people coming and knocking on our doors to come in and be a part of this new shift.
Now let's talk about another major pillar in terms of business facilitation, Nigeria's competitiveness, industrial manufacturing. This cohesion, coordinated approach between federal and state authorities, how does it happen? How can we get it to become something that we can leverage on for investment and manufacturing?
States such as Lagos actually has understood this quite a long time ago with their own economic summit that they conduct annually. They have special industry related policy conversations that they have with the stakeholders, but I haven't seen it in many other states. I think Edo is one of such states that have also done some similar things, but I haven't seen it across the length and breadth of the country. What I have been saying to some governors, where I had an opportunity of being involved in some discussions, I always share the fact that, look, worst case, you can actually gang up with 2 or 3 of your neighboring states and create industrial clusters. What I mean by that is that the areas around those boundaries of 2 or 3 states, when you look at it, the people basically have similar cultural nuances, and there are also comparative advantages of products and services and things that they can actually conceive of and create. Now, imagine, rather than one state underwriting it, you have 2 or 3 states coming together, developing it, and creating clusters. They can do a number of things. One would be a wealth creation among those bordering states. 2, they would also retain talent that usually either migrate to Lagos or some of the larger cities in the country, or some actually migrate out of the country, and by attracting them and be part of that high value add economic contributors. So essentially, one has to think outside of the box. And when you start doing that, you would see that the little successes you begin to create will actually attract both the federal government and also, in some cases, even international development agencies or international finance entities that like to be a part of the developmental aspects of low and medium income countries. And they would appear because they would see that there is a genuine, deliberate strategy of helping, uplifting people in those areas. So I would like to see states, either individually or collectively, coming together as a group to begin to lay out long-term plans in the areas of light manufacturing, value-added services, and so on and so forth.
Well, we've talked so much about the supply side. Now let's talk about the demand side. Finally, what can we do to stimulate and grow domestic demand?
I think it's a combination of things. Of course, the fiscal policy is very important, because when some of these pronouncements coming both from the central bank and the Ministry of Finance about certain kinds of spending is necessary, because the demand has to be catalyzed. We have a very large population. Unfortunately, they have been getting poorer and poorer over the last 5 or 6 years as a result of depreciation of the currency and so on and so forth. So the purchasing power has been declining. But one aspect of that is that there has to be money in circulation. So electronic payments, bringing in more of those things that the Ministry for Humanitarian Affairs is doing at the low end of the base of the pyramid. But I believe that the most important thing is that some catalytic investments need to happen, yes, whether it comes from the government or quasi-government entities.
We thank you so much for your insight tonight. Kyari Bukar, former chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. We appreciate your time.